Watson has a lot of people talking on behalf of him, whether it was every NFL reporter coming out with the same almost press release-like report at the same exact moment on a Friday a few months ago where we haven't heard from Watson. And I think until Watson looks at the Texans and tells them, I will never wear this jersey again, and I demand being traded, knowing Nick Caserio, who just took over as GM, and not knowing David Culley that well, but knowing what he's about and a lot of people he's worked with before, they are going to do everything in their power to make Deshaun Watson happy and remind him that we're new, we're fresh blood. There is no institutional knowledge of whatever you're upset about that we're coming into. So please give us a shot. And I think they want to make it work. They really do.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up for What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. Every week it seems like we're on the precipice of something this week. Free agency and perhaps the second case players with limited options as we look to see where this team can try and strengthen our roster with many holes going into the 2021 season. Obviously, Deshaun shadow continues to hang over us, bringing in a good friend of the show, Jordan, Texans _ thoughts. How you doing, Jordan?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing? Thank you for having me on the show. As crazy as it sounds, I'm actually pretty excited to talk Texans, but how you doing?
Yeah, all good, man. It's doing all right. How's the sort of restrictions and stuff with you in Canada? What kind of stage are you at?
It hasn't been too strict. We're still not supposed to have big gatherings and that stuff, but luckily we're allowed to, go out. Restaurants are open, bars, gyms, all that sort of stuff. So
okay.
It's not too bad, and it looks like things are getting better. Vaccines getting here. School next year should be in person, not online. So things are looking on the ups. Thank God.
Yeah, I think we're probably maybe 6 weeks away from kind of restaurants, bars here. But yeah, it's been a tough year, I think, in terms of enjoying yourself. But yeah, this football team doesn't really help. What's your kind of, if you had to sum up in a couple of sentences the off season of hell? It probably couldn't have gone any worse. How would you sum up the Caserio right through to the caretaker Culley?
It's been crazy because, when the season ended, that final game against the Titans, I really thought, hey, this is rock bottom. It can't go any worse from here. And day by day, week by week, Texans managed to change that thought and mess with my expectations and just kept finding a lower bar that they somehow managed to keep digging themselves in a deeper hole. And it's been crazy, but a lot of us are still here, still fighting it out, still trying to love this team and still support them. And hopefully, the guys that we've signed, maybe they weren't our first, second, or third choices, but hey, at the end of the day, they're on our team. We're going to support them, and I'm going to try and be as positive as I possibly can going forward.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? Because many people, you don't have delusions of grandeur that you're going to be in the top tier every year. That's not possible. That was never possible just by the way the team was run and the people making some decisions. But I think it's the level of self-implosion that just doesn't seem to stop, really. Bringing back David Johnson was perhaps a sign of that. I thought to increase a guy's guarantees, who was the lead back, who missed games with injury, on the bottom ranked 32nd best rushing attack in the league, to give him more guarantees than you had to in a season where you don't want to spend any money, it didn't really kind of settle that well with me.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of that restructure either. I think a lot of people are looking at that restructure and say, oh, well, Nick Caserio, he did a good job. He saved a couple $1 million, right? But the thing is that he should have saved a lot more if you actually did just simply cut David Johnson. And it speaks to kind of, the sunk cost fallacy that they have already invested so much in him through the way of the DeAndre Hopkins trade. And so they don't want to admit defeat. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake with that trade. They didn't get proper value. They don't want to admit that. And so they want to keep banging their head that, hey, David Johnson, 1 year it's going to work. Next year it's going to work. The year after it's going to work, whatever it is. And I don't know. Maybe they have a time machine. Maybe they can bring back 2016 David Johnson, and then sure, he'll be successful. But I'm not too super optimistic that he'll, ever return great value on that trade.
Yeah, and just pick up on that thing you said there. Jordan, right? So what kind of gets me, and it keeps itching away at the back of my mind, is there was a reference there to a previous regime, and we know the main stakeholder that's the carryover from the previous regime that should have gone the day that O'Brien did, right? And whether it's small things like keeping David Johnson here on slightly more money, in the grand scale of 182.5 million, an extra 2 million on your salary cap, it's small percentages, right? But signing guys like Dontre Hilliard, who was here in the previous regime, was their first guy that you re-signed for the next season. And then obviously the long snapper Kawuka that's come back, and we've let weeks go. It seems like that there's and we'll come on to the coaching staff as well, but again, it's carryover, and this should have been a clean slate. I think there just seems to be too many things stacking up for me right now that shows that it's not a clean break, it's not a new outlook, and it was kind of what Cal said. Not much of what he said, has actually really been true, but what he said was a reset, not a rebuild. And it feels like from a front office point of view, I know there's a couple of scouts and stuff that have left, but it doesn't feel like it's gone in a new direction in any true sense. And that just keeps eating away at me. And I know it's Easter being, and maybe I'm just over focused on it, because it is him, and he's and the fact that you've got McLean coming out saying he's got unprecedented power, he's even more powerful than he's ever been. That's why I keep going back to the point. I just don't think we've hit rock bottom yet.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're not overreacting. You're not over-focusing on him at all, because he is the single worst problem that the Texans have probably ever had with this organization. He's destroying this team step by step, day by day. And you're right. There's too much holdover from the previous regime, from players who just aren't simply good enough players that you want to bring back, to coaches. Certain guys on the defensive side of the ball, I think we kept, who was his name? Bobby King. We kept our running back coach, Danny Barrett, fine, whatever. But then we hear that Romeo Crennel is remaining on the team.
That's the worst one, isn't it? I think.
Because, sure, he's a great guy. Everyone loves him. Everyone loves to play for him. You never say a bad thing about him as a person. But, we saw what he could do as a head coach. Nothing spectacular. And now they call him director of football, or senior advisor of football, something. Yeah. It's just, it doesn't make sense to me. All we wanted is new voices, new people who would bring out their new visions and have a different plan. And we're not getting that. And to your point about, the David Johnson, the John Weeks, those small moves, like you said, it's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but it's these moves around the margins. Like, we never expected the Texans to make huge moves this offseason, right? But these little moves are also moves that you can't mess up. They're moves that they stack upon each other. One doesn't look too bad, but 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, then it starts to hurt your ability to build a team for the future. And so I'm with you in 100%. There's still some moves. There's some moves that have been good, but there's some moves that definitely require criticism.
And I think if you go back right through to all the stuff that Crennel was here, last season, it was, there's a limit that you can put on him, but it showed you he wasn't a plus as a head coach. So if he's not a plus as a head coach, does that mean he's a plus as an advisor? The 1 year that he was an advisor, Rabel called a terrible defense, so he didn't advise him there. And then when he was the coordinator, probably the biggest failing of any coordinator in probably the entirety of the franchise, but definitely in the last decade, was he didn't find a way to work Merciless, Clowney, and Watt on the field all at once. Completely failed at that when he had the chance. So, I don't know. Again, it's just holdover, and as you said, but again, it comes back to, do these people have football output, or is it the type of people they are? Other nice guys don't cause as much hassle, we'll keep them around.
Exactly. Are we going to see a hybrid defense between Lovie Smith and Romeo Crennel? Like, we have no idea, and we probably won't ever until they actually hit the field. And personally, I would rather just Crennel, he takes a backseat, and he's just kind of helping, help a rookie head coach transition and with those types of duties, and he doesn't touch anything football related. Hopefully that's the case, but I guess only time will tell.
Yeah, and the thing with Crennel is, as well, as you said, you're going a completely different direction. You're running in the opposite, the complete antithesis of his scheme. Well, in some ways, I know there's a lot of zone concepts too high. That's the kind of carryover. So maybe there's an element of there. But when he can't bring anything, or he didn't bring anything when he had full autonomy, He didn't help on the field. And I would argue a lot of the time, the way he phrased his answers to questions at the trade deadline, when you let what go, we're about to see Fuller sign for somebody in the next 3 or 4 days. He didn't trade those guys either. So I don't think he's got much great advice on off the field. So, and I don't know if the game's passed him by and he gets to a point, where it changes and you kind of lose your edge a bit, as an older guy. I don't know. But it feels like there's just too much carryover, and they're not starting afresh. And I suppose, what did you make of, which I think probably the only positive decision that the Caserio's made was probably the firing of Nick Martin that we covered a couple of weeks ago. But then the Justin Britt signing comes in straight away, or within days after. What did you make of that? Because for a guy who's not played for 2 full seasons after an ACL, 18, 20 months ago, teams kicked the tires on him last year. Kansas City and Green Bay both brought him in for a workout, chose not to sign him when guys went down. Corey Lindsey went down. They had the Kansas City's line was a bit of a reshuffle consistently. What do you think? What do you think they know that other teams don't? Because to sign him before free agency would suggest you're paying a bit of a premium. I know it's a hugely incentive-laden deal, but is that just a guy their chance or an upside, or what do you think of that signing?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm definitely a big fan of the Nick Martin cut. Like you mentioned, I think it's probably the best move that he's made this offseason. Had to happen. You're overpaying these underperforming guys, so that's great. But then the Brit signing, yeah, I think it caught a lot of people off guard. He wasn't really on a lot of people's radar, and I think maybe the whole reason why Green Bay and Kansas City passed up on him is because it was too soon after his ACL injury. Maybe he wasn't 100% healthy. That's a potential reason. And I think in terms of the deal, like you said, it's heavily incentivized. It was reported that it's $3.25 million and he can get up to $5 million. And then I think it was Sarah Barshop or someone who reported it maybe yesterday or the day before that said if he's active for all 16 games, then he'll hit that $3.25 million. And then there's some other incentives to get to the $5 million. So I think most likely you're sitting around $3.25 million. I can't really think of the other things that would get him to $5 million. Like if he's a Pro Bowler, I can't see that really happening. So, at that $3.25 million value, at the end of the day, it's a 1-year deal. There's not a whole lot to hate about it. Like in terms of the length of the deal, it's perfect. Those are the types of deals that we need to be signing this offseason. Nothing that really extends into 2022, 2023. Get these 1-year prove-it deals for veterans who are trying to make it back into the league, trying to, they're hungry. They want to try. They're going to put in 110% effort. They want to get paid again. They want to show that they still got it. So at the end of the day, I like that type of deal that Caserio gave out. And then talking about Britt personally, like as a player, I went back and watched his 2019 season and his 2018 season, and he's a guy who honestly his play isn't a whole lot different from Nick Martin. He's very scheme specific. He's going to do a lot better in an outside zone scheme where he can use his mobility very well. And he's not going to do so well in gap power runs where he just has to try and out-muscle you, out-bully you, and be really physical. He's not that type of guy. So if we do use him in the right scenario, in the right schemes, he can be a great upgrade over Nick Martin. If we don't, honestly, I think we'd get some pretty similar production. And I guess the benefit from that is that you're still paying him less than you are Nick Martin. So at the end of the day, it's kind of just a win-win no matter what happens. But I think right now, before we see him play, see the rest of the moves work out for the rest of the offseason, I think it's a good move by Caserio.
And do you think that shows a commitment then, or an indication that the team will predominantly go to zone? Because that was what they ran. They a lot of kind of slow developing pulling guard gap plays at the start of the year. It was terrible to watch. They tried it so many weeks on end, which we think Mike Devlin was sort of or pulling the strings behind. Do you think that's a sense that they saw actually David Johnson does run that? The vast majority of the line, well, not the majority, that's always been the issue, isn't it? That it's been a mixture of skill sets along the line, but they think bringing him in, it must show that they want to go to a zone kind of stretch scheme where they can get David Johnson and other type of runners, which is the easiest type of running back to find, is the one cut kind of guys.
Definitely, yeah. I think that would be the smart thing to do. If I had a lot of faith in Nick Caserio and having an aligned vision with David Cooley / Tim Kelly, that would definitely be the smart thing to do. To assume, sorry. Because it's just so important for a GM and a head coach to all be on the same page and share that same type of vision for the offensive scheme and whatnot. So I hope that's the case. We've seen so many cases where this team is built in, like you said, a mismatch of skills, where they don't always all fit together. So I have a little worry about it, but I think that is the path that they're planning on going towards.
A small note, but the cutting of Cullen Gillespie, I thought I know it's the first guy to go from the 2019 draft class. Brian Gaines' final kind of impact on the team. What do you think of that? Because I know they got rid of Jay Prosh. They went a year without a fullback, drafted one, and never really gave him many opportunities. And I know last year he was healthy, and it's a failed physical designation, so maybe he's got more issues than we're quite aware of. But do you think that's a move that they'll move away from a fullback again and not carry one this year, or what do you make of that? Because it feels like a guy, when you draft him, you think you get, at least get the length and breadth of his rookie deal, just because it's a cost controlled talent, and he did well on special teams when he was out there.
Yeah, no, when he was given some opportunities, he was very solid on special teams, and my mind always goes back to that Bills playoff game. He made so many crucial blocks, a few of them, that really changed the impact of the game. And so clearly he has potential. You're talking about a late 7th round pick. So from the Texans' view, they haven't invested too much in him. But I mean, like you said, at least see what he's got throughout his rookie contract. And that idea would make sense if they want to continue with a fullback in their scheme. And you look at the Ravens, and they often use fullbacks, but this is Tim Kelly's offense, and so Tim Kelly, a lot of last year, he would do a lot of spread concepts, a lot of 5 wide, where sometimes there wouldn't even be a running back. And so I think you said it perfectly that they're kind of going away from that, having that fullback in the system. I think they're going to run 4 running backs. I mean, we've already got 3 on the roster with David Johnson, Buddy Howell, and Dontrell Hilliard. So I think potentially we sign another one in free agency for cheap, or we just draft one in a super deep running back draft class this year. I'm sad to see Cullen Gillespie go. I thought he definitely deserved more of a chance, but I'm not too mad at it, because at the end of the day, how often are we really going to be using our fullback? I don't think much.
Yeah, I think so, and it's not a big deal, I think, in the grand scheme of it. Certainly one that will strike a chord with fans, and a guy who set the franchise record for appearances last year was John Weeks cut, and they've obviously moved on, touched on it earlier, but when a guy still performs at a level, when at a position where the money is almost identical in every team, to make a change like when they did with Trevor Daniel at punter and ended up cutting him after 4 or 5 weeks in the 2019, it feels like making changes on special teams at that position, or those sort of specialist positions where kicking a field goal, punting is all procedural. Is that a risk? Do you think that they maybe just don't need this year, or do they think it's just another nod to the future and they're trying to create a new identity for the Texans in 21, whatever that kind of transitional year looks like?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think that's how the Texans see it, definitely trying to get younger, because even in last season, they were constantly calling up and calling down our new long snapper, Anthony Kukwa, I believe that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
And so I think they were trying to get him more looks, trying to transition him into that role. Weeks, he's getting up there for sure, so maybe that's their thought process. But I think I'm kind of with you on this, where, he's been so dependable for his entire career. I mean, personally, I can't think of a single bad snap that he's had. And when you're at that position, it's a position that, it doesn't require athleticism. You don't need to be the fastest, the strongest guy. You can play to your late 30s, even 40s, right? So it's not like John Weeks was declining. And that's kind of the overall thought process I have with that move, is that the team needs to have better talent evaluation. And that comes from not wanting to bring back a big player like Will Fuller. And it also comes from these little moves around the margins. Like, the ability to evaluate players is so huge. And I think they missed the mark on this one. But I guess it's kind of the theme of all the moves that we've been talking about. At the end of the day, it's not going to be a too big of a deal. And hopefully Kukwa can hopefully learn a thing or two from the legend John Weeks.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of times they brought him back and re-signed him and then released him, brought him back. It was obvious there was some sort of intent there. But again, it goes back to that theme of the holdover. A bit of cap and renegotiating and restructuring today. Brandon Cooks has been signed. What looks like on the face of it, I saw people saying kind of congratulating Caserio for it, but ultimately, from what I can see, they voided 2 years of his deal, which, and I don't expect Caserio to be too concerned about it. When you give a second round pick, the reason why they gave a premium was because LA paid all his signing bonus off, and it was a negotiable contract that you could keep a sort of upper end talent for 3 to 4 years. So we've given up the last 2 years of his deal on that, and then we've converted his signing bonus. So the net impact is a 6.5 million reduction in cap hit this year. But certainly it feels like maybe Cooks saw it as a way he might want to get out. I don't know, but it's not often that you get a player to void 2 years of their deal.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was kind of thinking. Is this kind of a win-win for the Texans and for Cooks? He kind of gets out of the situation maybe a bit quicker, and it's all clean and nothing. He doesn't request the trade or anything. That's definitely an interesting angle. But I think overall, like you said, like it's a good move. It's a move that a lot of us expected it to happen, like wanted it to happen, and so that kind of tells you, in the scope of what makes a good GM, like this is definitely a move that should be on their radar and should have been done. So you can give him his props for that. It's deserved, but it's also a move that most GMs should make. And so the fact that I think so many people are very excited about it, and I was pretty happy to see it as well. It just kind of says how low the bar was before Nick Caserio. So the fact that he does something like pretty obvious is just like, let's celebrate, let's drink, like, you know what I mean? So I think overall it's great. I have no complaints whatsoever. I think Cooks, at his, I believe it was like 12.5 million, his previous cap hit, it wasn't the greatest value, for someone who he's not really a wide receiver one, and with his concussion history in the past, there's some risk there, right? So now at 6.5 million, that's honestly a steal. And so I like it overall.
Yeah, I just keep going back to the second round pick that you give up for him, and it's, if you think you gave the second round pick there away, you give another, you give another 2/3 that they've given away that they could have had this year. It's just a lot of picks for guys that you want. And look, as your third round goes, the less chance you have of these guys working out. But it feels like there's 3 picks there we could have had. Plus, obviously all the comp picks have come out, and we've seen the Texans don't have any. And when you lose a player like DJ Reader to a market-setting deal for his position, in theory, you should get a pick back. But the recklessness, I think, of the previous moves, and I include Cooks in that, seems like that will not stop reverberating around the Texans, and as they try and team build as the years go by after the O'Brien sort of era of giving him too much power and being over his head. So it is what it is. But I thought, it looks like you're going to be looking to replace that guy in a couple of years when you gave a second round pick up for him. So you'll get 3 years out of him. But just a side note, an interesting restructure, but more space on the cap. And the reason why there is the league have set $182.5 million for this year, obviously come down from 198 the year prior. So a lot of teams are in a bad position. Texans not too bad. Obviously the cutting of JJ Watt, we're sitting there circa sort of 17 million. We've got 11 million carryover from the previous year. If they are to spend cap doll, in fact, before actually that, Jordan, do you see them making any more cuts before free agency opens officially on Wednesday, but the legal tampering opens Monday?
Yeah, so there's been a few names floated out there, Benardrick McKinney, possibly Bradley Roby. I think a guy like Zach Fulton is one of the guys who's deserving of being cut. Maybe even Brandon Dunn, Darren Fells. It really all comes down to how much money they want to save. I think it was Texans cap. He tweeted out today after the Cooks restructure, they're at 22 million. So we're sitting pretty good. But I think honestly, every dollar does count, and I would cut all of those guys. Personally, but what do I see actually happening? I think the only guy who could be cut is Bradley Roby. I'll get to him in a second, but I thought that the whole Benardrick McKinney thing, I thought that would happen, but if we were going to re-sign Tyrell Adams, and I think it's still possible that we do, but I think he is going to at least test free agency. I don't think we're going to get a deal done with him before free agency. And so we're going to have one of him or BMAC back. It's not going to be both, in my opinion. So if Tyrell Adams resigns, we can cut BMAC. If not, we keep BMAC and let Adams walk. And I'd be fine with either of those situations. I don't think it's a big deal in the end of in the big scope of things. But with Bradley Roby, that name's been floated out there a lot, and I really don't get it. I mean, he's a valuable cornerback. He can play outside, he can play inside. Maybe he's not your cornerback 1, but he's a very, very high level cornerback 2. And for the contract that he signed, he's just making around $10 million per year, and his contracts were voided, his guarantees were voided because of the whole PED thing. It's a pretty team-friendly contract. It's ranked 15th in the league out of cornerbacks. Like, that's pretty damn good. You're not going to get another cornerback this year on that same value. Who's going to want to come here to the Texans taking a little bit of a discount like that, right? So I don't see the point in cutting Roby. I think the team will argue maybe it's not so much his performance, but it's the PED thing. It's maybe how committed he is to the team and whatnot. But that one really makes makes me scratch my head.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the position that we're going to be the lightest at, because you think, you've got to hope all common sense of prevailing Gaines won't resign, Hargreaves won't resign, and they're going to need to find at least one outside corner, if not two, and then probably depending on where John Reed's at, which we don't know because they refused to play him. Another example by Crennel should not be back. But yeah, that's the position potentially we're most short at, I think, and I think that an edge rusher. I mean, obviously the quarterback is the one looming. We'll come on to that a bit, but the defense, and all things being equal, and Watson stays, the defense needs to be invested in. Cornerback just seems a position that there isn't too many guys out there this year to try and fill your holes in. Where do you sit on spending in free agency? Because I think for every Antonio Smith or Jonathan Joseph or Manning, you've got your Brock Osweilers, your Aaron Colvins. I think there's the success rate of players leaving their teams and not being paid for a situation they've probably been there 4 or 5 years. They're letting them go they're letting them walk for a reason. So I think it's always a buyer's beware market. And I think, people do champion the teams. It's good for the fans, it's good for owners, but I don't see it as a concrete way to build your roster composition in a robust manner, because you find that I think over the years, I mean, if you look at last year's free agency class, for example, I mean, is there anybody there that you would necessarily think you want to find a player like that? There is small examples of obviously Shaq Barrett being one of the recent ones that goes and leads the league in sacks, but they don't happen often. I think you've got to be careful. I know fans want to see teams spend money, but it's not the more traditional and classic way to build your roster. And you can get lucky and you can look very smart, but there's a lot of pitfalls to be found, I think, in this time of year.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think with free agency, if you can get one of those star players, I don't think we're in the position to realistically this offseason, but if you can get one of those star players, like you said, the Shaq Barrett, maybe this year it's your Leonard Williams, your Yannick Ngakoue, that type of guy, your William Jackson III. If you can get those where you're very confident in their ability to translate to your team and then still have success, then yeah, that's a great way to build your team. But overall, like you said, it is pretty hit or miss, especially with those like kind of mid-tier free agents. A lot of the time they're guys that are, going on 28, 29, 30. Their play is starting to decline, and you don't want to be handing them out for your contracts for a lot of money. I mean, look at Kyle Van Noy with the Dolphins. He got his contract just last year, and now after 1 year, they want to cut him because he hasn't lived up to his contract and he's making a shit ton of money. So I definitely hear where you're coming from. I think the Texans, they're not in the boat where they're going to go get a top tier guy. They're not in the boat where, maybe they get one mid tier guy. Maybe we see another Randall Cobb signing. But mainly it's going to be the low tier guys in the second, third waves of free agency, where you're signing 1-2 year deals for veterans and for prove it deals. Maybe a guy like you want to give Jadeveon Clowney a chance and bring him back. I think those are the types of deals that, they're lower reward, but they're also lower risk. And so I think that's something that, Nick Caserio should and hopefully will focus on, keeping the books pretty relatively clean for 2022, 2023, and just seeing if we can get some solid vets to, help our young guys progress. And, so we're not just kind of running out an 0-16 dumpster fire of a team as well. And then also maybe we take a chance on a guy like, some guys who have had some issues with the previous teams, maybe a John Ross who has some injury issues, but he's got a boatload of potential. Maybe one of those young guys who we can get their career back on track. Hopefully, as crazy as that sounds, we're the place to do that. But yeah, I think those are the types of guys that we can look for in free agency.
Yeah, I think the worst thing they could do is spend money on guys that have got a risk of injury history.
Yeah,
and them sit and not actually be out there, because as you said, any cap dollars we can save this off season is a plus. And I think any young guy, whether it's undrafted free agent, whether it be a guy that can develop in the draft, etc., I think they're the kind of guys you want to give ultimate preference to this year. And obviously the 2020 draft class will probably find out a lot about them, because we certainly didn't find out much about them last year. In terms of if you were to say what's the most important position they need to address, would you agree it's corner, or would you look somewhere else?
I would say it's defensive end, pass rusher. They're pretty close in terms of importance. I just think within Lovie Smith's scheme, within the Tampa 2, the cornerbacks, they play a very specific role. You just need them to be tall, have long arms, be physical, play that flat zone, can tackle a little bit, but they don't really have to be great man cover corners. They don't really have to have great deep speed. They're going to have that safety help over top. So their role within that scheme, you can find guys for cheaper. Like, they don't have to be world-class athletes, amazing at everything, right? If you're running a different type of scheme. But within that scheme, it depends so much on pressure, getting after the quarterback and rushing with just 4 defensive linemen. And so currently constructed, I mean, it looks like we'd start Whitney Merciless, either Jonathan Grenard or Jacob Martin, Brandon Dunn, and, Charles Omenihu maybe, or Ross Blacklock. And that defensive line, I don't know about you, but if I'm the quarterback, I'm sitting pretty. I'm not concerned whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
So I think the system as a whole, it places more emphasis on your pass rushers getting after the quarterback. And so because of that, I'd definitely put defensive end as number 1.
Yeah, and I think, I suppose, isn't it? You saw at times in the end of the 2019 season, I think a lot of people couldn't believe they didn't sign any edge rusher. The fact that Merciless is still here, and he's a guy that we haven't talked about. I don't know if they do cut him, or I think the biggest hope is really, as bad as it sounds to say, is that he retires, because it's he's not a guy that you can count on, and his film was not great. Beyond a sort of romantic recoupling with Jadeveon Clowney, I think most of us would want to see that. Where he is right now, was he coming up for maybe 28 this year? Is there any guys out there that you think, bearing in mind we're going to have to look for different type players? Actually, in fact, Jacob Martin, I know you're a big fan. Do you think he fits as an edge rusher in a 4-3?
I think, ideally his size, I think, is more fit for a 3-4 outside linebacker. But within that role, what Anthony Weaver asked him to do was just not really playing to his skill sets. Was a lot of dropping in coverage. A lot of the time, he would be rushing over the interior versus guards, and where he can't really use his speed, which is his main element and his main strength. And he couldn't use that to his advantage. So Anthony Weaver didn't really use him that well. I think he tried to get too fancy, too cute with him. Whereas if you just simplify his role in a 4-3 defensive end role, where hey, I'm only going to be rushing the quarterback and playing the run occasionally, right? If he's just doing that, he can just pin his ears back and get after the quarterback. He is going to be scary. I really do believe that. I still believe highly in his game. I think he just deserves more snaps and more and a better utilization of his role and his skill set. So I'm very high on him.
Yeah, I think I think as well, there's a lot to be said as well for getting just defensive tackles, because I don't know if we actually have any true DTs that are going to be be able to play your 2 and 3 and 3 eye tech in this new defense. You've got guys like Dalvin Tomlinson out there, who's kind of one of these names that always seems to be available. Sheldon Rankins as well, who's a guy that was a high draft pick. A guy that I quite like actually is Roy Robertson Harris from the Bears, and I think they've got a lot of guys to pay. So I don't think he'll go. He missed a lot of time last year. But if I go back to the get-in look, I don't watch a lot of the NFC, but certainly just going through clips of guys that caught my eye, that when he played against Green Bay week 1, I think it was the start of last year, the year before, I can't remember, the opening league's opening game on Thursday night, he was doing a lot of damage in the trench and showing a lot of juice. So I think we need guys like that who can come in and just be space eaters and actually make a difference. I think a guy Jonathan Hankins as well, when we played the Raiders, the game that tore his pec, he flashed a lot as well. So it's guys like that who are probably not going to have huge value. You maybe get for $6, $7, $8 million. You might. I think that the Texans would be wise to invest in one of those, because I think when the structural element of your defense isn't sound like we saw last year up front, and people can just run on you at will, it's a long old year. And if you're down, and who knows who'll be throwing the ball for us on the other side of the team. But I think they need to find guys, and these guys can, if somebody's the wrong side of 30, I don't think they necessarily need to be too concerned about that, because you can play to 32, 33, even 34 and still play at a good level, because it's all about just strength moreover. And I think they need to find guys that's just going to be able to shore up that unit, because it was not pretty at times watching that run defense.
Oh yeah, 100%. I'm with you. I do like those two names. I think they'd be perfect in our price range. I think one guy I could add to that is Devon Godshaw. He was the nose
Dolphins,
tackle,
yeah,
for the Dolphins, and he's relatively young. He's 26. He only played 5 games this past season, but all the years before he played 16, then 16, and then 15. So it's not like he's injury prone or anything. But I went back and I watched his 2019 tape, and that dude is a stud. He is very, very hard to move. He's exactly what you're talking about, where you need that strong space-eating, run-stopping defensive tackle. We saw Brandon Dunn. He's not it. We saw PJ Hall. He's not it either. So I'm definitely with you on getting that. I'm a big believer of building in the trenches first. Trenches are how you win football games. And whether it's defensive tackle, defensive end, we definitely need to pour resources into that as much as possible through free agency and through the draft, definitely as well.
I think PJ Hall, and you've got to hope Ross Blacklock comes in and improves in that position. Now, hopefully they'll be a bit more sensible with some better coaching staff, guys that can come in and be a bit. I think the worst bit about the previous coaching staff, they didn't play at the players' strengths, both sides of the ball. I think that was just a consistent theme that was tiring to watch at times. And there's certainly some guys back there. I think PG Hall will potentially be better than that. And a guy that actually got snaps ahead of Blacklock was Wilafulahai, a Big Z, as he's often known as. Guy, small school guy. Do you think they've not confirmed bringing him back? And I know he's probably a lot further down the pecking order, but you think guys that you've had in a system for a year, low risk, low money, potential high reward, they're the kind of guys that you want to be looking on your roster. But I don't think we have a pipeline of guys that we've developed on our practice squad, again, because of the previous coaching staff.
Yeah, it's players like that, PJ Hall, Ross Blacklock, Big Z. They're guys who, you can't put a lot of stock in. You can't depend on them. You don't want to go into your season saying, okay, I'm going to start Blacklock and Hall, and I'm going to be great, right? They're kind of more depth guys, and if they do break out, if they do show a lot of flashes in training camp, then that's great. Then you've got great depth. I do believe, like you said, the scheme change going from predominantly 3-4, 2 gapping to a 4-3, potentially 1 gapping type of scheme will do PJ Hall and Ross Blacklock a lot of good, because they're a bit more undersized guys who use their athleticism to get off blocks and to crash through running lanes and stuff like that. They're not really going to be, those big space eaters that we were talking about. So I think definitely if we're using them to their strengths, there's more potential to be seen there. But also I would much prefer going the route of, signing a veteran to play in front of them, to start in front of them, and don't force them into that kind of starting role and have high expectations for them.
Yeah, and I think you've got to look in the division as well. There's a lot of free, sort of mid to lower end of your roster free agents end up staying in the division because you got probably a better understanding for them. You got a lot of tape on them. I think Dwayne Smoot from the Jags, I think he got 5.5 sacks last season, 17 QB hits. I thought he flashed it, particularly the game in Jacksonville, and I suppose that wasn't too troublesome for some of the bigger guys that Nick Martin and Fulton probably struggled with the physicality. But Dwayne Smoot and Nico Autry as well is another one that's there from the Colts as well, 31. I know he's had some injury history as well, but he's a guy that definitely flashes, and he's a guy, and a guy who's no longer in the division as well was Gerald Casey. He used to cause the Texans no end of issues every time we played them. And again, available. Didn't play much for Denver after he kind of got traded for a 5th round pick. Was kind of a tough one, but he goes out and again he's available, and I don't think it'll take a huge amount to get him on board.
Yeah, no, I really I hear you, and I really like Nico Autry as a player. I think he's kind of what people hope Charles Omenihu can be. You know, he can play defensive end on rundowns, and then he can kick inside to defensive tackle, that 3 tech position, and really get after the quarterback. He's definitely a very fun player. I don't really think the Colts will bring him back, so I'd love to see him on the Texans, for sure. I think kind of going along that line of interdivision players being potential free agents. What are your thoughts on Malcolm Butler? I know a lot of people are going to be linking his name to the Texans.
Yeah, if he signs, when you said Cal Van Noy as well, I think if he signs, you'll know who it was. Now, famously, Easterby picked him up from the airport when he signed as an undrafted free agent. If you ever watched any of, if you've subjected yourself to any of his sermons online, I wouldn't be surprised. And I think if he does, it will be another. I look at, is he an up? It's hard to be too annoyed about it from a footballing sense, because of course he's better than what we've got. But we don't have anybody really the position that can play an outside. I mean, look, Will Fuller burned them so many times we played them. Would he be better than what we've got? Yes, but it just shows you who's making the decisions, and I think that's perhaps a concern. I think cornerback's probably going to be the hardest one to address, just in terms of every year it's a premium position. The demand far outweighs the supply, and you're looking to hit on guys. Have you got anyone else that you think the Texans feasibly could bring in at that spot?
Yeah, I think, one guy who really excites me to play outside corner. I'll give you one outside corner. I'll give you one nickel corner.
Yeah.
For the outside, taking a chance on a guy like Akello Witherspoon from the 49ers.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, he's had some injury concerns. He hasn't been able to get out on the field too much, but when he has, he's flashed, and he was a super, super intriguing prospect out of college, out of Colorado, I believe. And he's huge. He's 6'2", 6'3". He's got super long arms. He's very, very sound in zone coverage. That's always been his specialty. And watching some of his film this past year, he's actually gotten into tackling. He used to hate tackling out of college. He was allergic to it. But in our system, we need those boundary corners to tackle. And he's got some added physicality to his game. He checks off all the boxes you want of a Lovie Smith corner. Those are the types of deals that we got to take, because he's not going to be breaking the bank. He's not going to be asking for a lot of money like a William Jackson III, like a Patrick Peterson, Richard Sherman, AJ Boye, all those types of guys. But Akello Witherspoon, on a prove it deal, maybe give him 1 year, 4 to 6 to 7 million, depending on how many suitors he's got. I would be definitely down for that. What are your thoughts on him? And then I'll get to my nickel guy.
When we practice with them 3 years ago now, in joint practices, everybody was talking about Akello Witherspoon could be the next sort of top 5 corner. He had all the traits. He was ready. It seemed as if he was going to break out. So I think it's there. He's one of those guys that it's a bit of a risk, but yeah, the upside is there. Yeah, definitely.
Definitely, yeah. And then kind of maybe my entire crush of free agency is a nickelback from the Steelers, Mike Hilton. And oh my God, he is just a joy to watch on the field. He really takes physicality to another level. I mean, he's a dude who's 5'9", like 190, but he feels like he's the biggest dude on the field because he's constantly coming after you. He has that kind of same mentality of Tyrann Mathieu, of Budda Baker, those smaller guys that really want to prove themselves, and they play a lot bigger than their size. And the Steelers, they do a lot of fun things with him. I kind of compare him to kind of like a poor man's Kenny Moore, and not even that poor because he's actually a very talented player, but he'll cover the slot. He'll cover some of those tight ends, those big tight ends who move into the slot. I saw him have a rep versus Evan Ingram of the Giants, and he completely shut him down. They'll also blitz him a lot. They blitz him so much, whether it's run defense or whether it's getting after the quarterback. And he has this like sixth sense of being able to time the snap and just blow up plays. And I think that's an element that we sorely need is someone who can create big plays. He had 3 interceptions last season and 3 sacks, and I think he missed like 5 games. So if he was healthy, man, he would have had an absurd season. But I think he's someone who he won't get paid too much because of the nature of the position. It's just nickel at the end of the day. teams don't value that as much as outside corner, even though it's arguably just as valuable in my opinion. But I definitely think if I could have one guy this year, just one guy, give me one guy, please. It's Mike Hilton.
I did have Brian Poole from the Jets on my list, but he signed for Athletes First, so you can cross him off. That one. I think Desmond King. I think everybody will remember him getting traded in the division to the Titans from LA, and I think he's a guy. He didn't play that well, and it's difficult to readjust. So I don't think they'll necessarily re-sign him, but he's a guy who's predominantly a slot guy that we can go. It's funny you said Hilton, because I thought Cameron Sutton played a lot more for Pittsburgh down the stretch just when they got some injuries, and look, the defense didn't go the way they wanted. But he's a guy that I know people in Pittsburgh are definitely high on. I think cornerback, I think, is in secondary as a whole, it's one of those positions. It is literally, and it is rudimentary as it sounds, it is a year-to-year thing, because guys can come back and just look shot. Like AJ Boye's legs last year, loved AJ Boye, should have kept him, should have tagged him. There was no reason to let him go. And that, was one of the decisions that kind of just sort of put us away from being a top-end dominant defense. And we never got that position right. Obviously, Kevin Johnson is on the list this year as well. But I think his legs kind of went, and he just doesn't take a huge amount of injuries to add up. And then you're looking at a guy who looks off the pace, and there's no probably hiding positions at that. Do you think they sign a safety at all that can come down and do a bit of work in the box, just because they don't really have? Well, we don't really know what Lonnie Johnson is, but I saw him tweet back at somebody. He's not moving back to corner. Do you think they sign somebody like that, like Keanu Neal or something? Or I mean, I suppose he's probably not the kind of guy they go for. But do you think they go and add somebody to the safety position, or do you think there's just too light at corner? They're probably not going to have the luxury of doing that.
Yeah, really quick, I want to touch on Desmond King and kind of why he struggled with the Titans is because they're more of like a man-heavy defense.
Yeah,
and
he's his own guy.
He's purely his own guy, and so I think I think he's gonna kind of get a small deal this season just because of teams will see, oh, he had a bad 2020. He's very limited to just zone, very limited to just slot. But if you got a team like us who needs a slot, who needs guys who are strong in zone coverage, he's a perfect fit. So I would definitely love him. I love that you brought that name up. What else do you say? Moving on to safety. Yeah, I think Lonnie Johnson, it's smart that they're not moving him back to corner. I know he has the perfect measurements for it, perfect athleticism for it, the physicality you need for it, but you just don't want to keep messing with this kid's development. I mean, they already messed with it once when they moved him to safety so quickly and didn't even tell him before the offseason. So I like that they're keeping him there. And I think him and Justin Reed, I think they fit the 2-high system very well. So I don't think that we're going to be signing a starter. I think Justin can play that free safety. He played a lot of single high early in his career, and he showed that, he can do it. He's not going to be a liability there, but he's also not going to be like a pure ball hawk like your Earl Thomas. But in a 2-high, I think he's going to be really good there. And in 2020, this past season, I watched Lonnie Johnson's film to see how he did at safety, and he did a lot better in coverage when he was in that 2-high as opposed to single high or in the box. So I think it's a good fit for both of their skill sets. Justin can play free, Lonnie can play strong. And if we do see a safety signing, I think it'll be the kind of, like Michael Thomas when we signed him a year ago or 2 years ago, kind of that third, fourth safety who can occasionally come in, maybe be a dime linebacker, but mainly his main contributions are going to be on special teams. That's what I think. If we do see a safety signing, it'll be.
Yeah, talking a guy who's undrafted, so you'll definitely go and chase a payday. And again, just it's hard to get a good grasp of the scheme, but definitely under the department. The name escapes me, but at the Chargers last season, Gus Bradley was and he predominantly plays cover 3, kind of zone concepts, cover the team. And a guy who really shone for them last year was a guy Michael Davis. Now he came out of Birmingham Young, 2017, undrafted, but he's got 5 interceptions in his career. He had 3 last year, but he racks up the tackles. 166 tackles over 4 seasons, and he only got 14 in his rookie year because he didn't play much. So I think he's a guy that potentially could come in and be a guy who's got upside. But at that position, I suspect he'll maybe have a market. But he's the kind of guy that he's maybe a name that people don't know as well. But certainly from some tape that I watched today, he definitely flashes that he's got a good transitional quickness. which you need when playing in zone to try and break on the ball. So he's a guy that I think, a name like that just maybe flies under the radar. Like Shelby Harris last year, I really wanted them to sign a defensive tackle. His market collapsed and he ends up going back to Denver. And he had a great season in Denver. So who they're high on him and want to re-sign him, but are let them test the market. So it's these kind of names that you don't know. Not in a naming kind of sense of Eric Murray, but a kind of name of there's some production there. There's signs of an upside, and there's more to go. In terms of a big position, I think we need to fill and address is just the type of linebackers, because I don't think we have really any linebackers at the minute who can get those deep drops, sideline to sideline, coverage ability that you need in a 4-3. Have you got any guys like that you think we'll have to sign somebody?
Yeah, I've got the perfect name for you, and I agree with you. It's a huge and it's an underrated need. We kind of forget, for how as bad as our defense was last year, we kind of forget that a root of a lot of our problems has always been that we don't have a single coverage linebacker on the team. And so my name for you is Alex Anzalone out of the Saints, and he plays Mike for them. He is maybe not the most physically built guy. He's not your Bernardrick McKinney, but that's not what we need in this system. We need smaller, quicker, more athletic linebackers who can cover. And the Saints play a lot of cover too. And I've watched every single snap of his 2020 season. They played a lot of Tampa too, actually. And they asked Anzalone to cover that deep middle zone. That's kind of almost like at the safety level, right? And he was really, really good at flipping his hips, running downfield with slot wide receivers. I saw him carrying the seam versus Kenny Golladay, who's going to get paid this offseason.
Yeah.
And, obviously you don't want him doing that on a snap-by-snap basis. I'm not saying he's going to cover Golladay out of the slot all day long, but he's the best linebacker I've watched this offseason who can fit that role to a T. And maybe you may lose a little bit in the run game with him. So he's not the most physical guy, but he gives you everything you want out of that Mike position from a coverage standpoint. He's very, very good there. And I don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to break the bank. The Saints probably aren't going to bring him back. They're like negative $50 million in cap space. And then they just tagged Marcus Williams. So I think with him as a free agent, with Sheldon Rankins and Trey Hendrickson as well, I think Anzalone's going to get out of their grasp and maybe he'll get a deal for let's see, linebackers, maybe 4 to 7, 8 million at the most, something like that, and that would be very great for us.
Yeah, a couple of guys I think we could look at, and I've seen actually in the last few days they're getting a bit of run in terms of potential signings. The Vikings, Eric Wilson came out of Cincinnati in 2017. A guy who's got a lot of coverage abilities, asked to do a lot away from the line of scrimmage. And we really need off the ball linebackers, because if this system is going to fall down, it's going to be getting gutted up the seam and on sort of shallow crossers and just kind of taking easy money in behind the front four. So he's a guy. And then the other guy that I was looking at was Nick Morrow from the Raiders. I think he's a guy who actually, if you watch his tape, and actually it was in the Athletic today, he was one of 5 guys they called out, and there's tape of him going stride for stride with T.Y. Hilton last year. When they played in Vegas last year. So guys that can cover. But then I think what Morrow's kind of good at is a bit of an underrated skill, and we'll need to probably find secondary level pressures, because we just simply don't have that ability. But Morrow's shown he can blitz, and I think that's the kind of guy that we need to do that. A guy, again, small school. I was just looking up there, Greenville. He was coming out of. So I don't think the NFL's seen too many Greenville alumni getting some bank. But I think he's a guy that could potentially get money. But again, a name that kind of goes under the radar, that we can look to hopefully try and improve this defense, because it can't get any worse, you'd hope. On the other side of the ball, conscious of time before Mr. Cully gets up to the mic this evening, do you see them spending any money on the offensive side of the ball, considering how many sunk costs they've got with the Randall Cobb contract, etc. this year?
Ideally we do sign a wide receiver to help try and replace Will Fuller. Because as it does seem that they're going to let him walk, and then he'll probably get paid by some team pretty handsomely. So if you're looking at the depth chart, you got Brandon Cooks. He moves into that wide receiver 1 spot, and you got Cobb and you got QT, and neither of them you want on the outside. So do you depend on a Chad Hansen? Do you depend on an Isaiah Coulter? I wish we had seen more out of them last season to really know.
Yeah, especially Coulter.
I think Hansen showed a lot of good flashes in the 3-4 games that he played, but as a wide receiver too, that's a tall task for him, right? So, maybe they go out and they sign a guy like a Nelson Aguilar. That would be probably a pretty mid-high tier free agent that I don't really have too high expectation that they do actually sign him, but he would be a perfect fit for what this offense needs. Another deep threat, in my opinion. I think Tim Kelly showed that he did really good with 2 speedy guys, 2 deep threats. So I wouldn't mind that. Another kind of more under the radar name is Isaiah Mckenzie of the Bills. He is a speedster himself, but he's never really gotten a big chance. He's kind of their wide receiver 4, and even he's their wide receiver 4 when John Brown is injured, and wide receiver 5 when he's healthy. But he's a really great punt returner, really good kick returner. He's got great speed. He gets you yak in the open field. He's an athlete, and so I think he could be someone that could help bolster the wide receiver core. But I think in terms of other positions, I would like them to add a different running back because I'm still not confident in David Johnson, and my guy there is Mike Davis from the Panthers. He does it all. He's a very well-rounded running back. I don't know if they'll actually go there. I don't know if they'll actually go offensive line. I feel like they have their 5 set. Do you think they have their 5 set with Tunsil, Sharping, Britt, Fulton, and Howard?
I think they probably bring in somebody that potentially beats them out. You've got to hope Sharping comes back and ready to compete and actually trades this off season, which if you follow him on kind of social media, I don't think he necessarily is. Not to say that if you don't put workouts online, then you're not trying hard, but that was definitely the biggest allegation leveled at him in this year. I think based on the picks, based on everything, I just don't think you can afford to. I think you just need to muddle your way through, whether it's a 3rd, 4th round pick, perhaps. In the interior, that's fine. You can't spend any more on tackles. We're out at that, and I'm sure Roderick Johnson will find himself a nice market this season and get paid. And again, it just shows you that, plus the fact that the Jets really, the Chiefs, released both their tackles, just shows you the faith that teams have got in this draft class again, that we could have easily filled through our own picks rather than selling the farm out for Laramie. So I think we've capped ourselves on that. I think the wide receiver, if we do get one, we need to bring in a big body guy. We need to complement the skill sets of the smaller, faster, shiftier guys across the board. And you talk about building a basketball team, so that's what you need to do. I don't want to invest any money at running back. You just got to go rookies you can find. It's the easiest position to fill. Just like wide receiver, you can find them at any spot, I think. So, but we will need to find a guy that will complement that. And if Fells is gone, and it's only Aitkins going into the last year of his deal, and Pharaoh Brown does come back, which he's expected to, then potentially might need to pick up a tight end somewhere, maybe a younger guy that's in the draft, and we can develop and can sit behind Brown. Because I thought week 17 against the Titans, albeit catching passes from D4, but I thought Pharaoh Brown started to look like a starting tight end. So I think, him and Aitkins, you might want to get somebody in behind there if Fells goes. So, I think we'll be definitely shopping in the 2nd and 3rd wave. This time next week, we'll probably just be sort of into the 2nd wave. What's your sort of over-under for how many players the Texans have picked up in a week's time, and then subsequently 2 weeks after that?
Oh, man. In a week's time, I think I would be a little surprised if we sign more than one player, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I think, like you said, after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, then we'll probably overall we might maybe sign 2 or 3 guys. They're going to be more, depth guys, backup guys. Maybe we get one starter on the defensive side of the ball, realistically. But I think the beef of our reinforcements this offseason will come in the draft, which I'm super excited for.
Yeah, I think so, and that's going to be the way they look to build. And you don't want to spend, and you think you can't necessarily assume that Caserio will mirror the behaviours that they showed in New England, but I think there'll be an element of that, and they certainly didn't really ever spend it. It was the 3rd, 4th, and the latter waves and wire pickups that they got on. Jordan, just before we finish out, we've got David Cully coming on the mic in a couple of minutes. What's your sort of 1-2 minute prediction of how this Deshaun Watson saga ends? And we'll end on that.
Oh gosh, yeah. I'm surprised we actually made it through the entire podcast without even referencing it. That is crazy. But unfortunately, as horrible as it sounds, I do think he'll be traded. Obviously, in a perfect scenario, we can mend the relationship and keep our MVP level quarterback, best quarterback in the league, if you're asking me. But I think it's too far gone. I think for that to happen, Cal McNair would need to either step down or fire Joe Easterby, or both, honestly. And I don't see that happening. It would have happened by now if it was going to, but I think he's going to get traded probably the week prior to the draft, where we hopefully will get an absolute haul that is unprecedented. A lot of teams I keep hearing that the Bears are going to give like their entire draft class or even 2 draft classes. I mean, obviously you got the Dolphins, the Jets, who have the most picks possible. So hopefully we get a great value for Deshaun. Obviously, at the end of the day, you're still not going to really be able to replace a quarterback of his caliber, but I think that's what it's going to come down to. And when you have all these picks, like we've been talking about, the best way to build your team is through the draft. And I've been doing a lot of mock drafts, been messing around with it because that's the only thing you can do at this time of the year. A lot of mock drafts, and you can get 15 picks if you keep trading down, which Nick Caserio loves to do. You can really draft the whole side of the starting offense or defense. So it'll be interesting. I do think he'll be traded, unfortunately, but I kind of just want the saga to be over, to be honest.
Yeah, that's what you want. I think the longer this goes on, it impacts free agency, and nobody kid themselves that this isn't going to prevent guys potentially signing here, and hopefully they get it out. I think just the fact that you're running away the most important piece you ever could ask for, and probably a better guy you could ask for, probably speaks more about the internal dysfunction and the levels of it. And I think I do feel for the Texas media staff at times, because it's almost like they've been told not to say Easterby's name, and that's just how toxic the relationship is. But we'll see what David Culley's got to say tonight, and see what if he addresses any of the questions that are around that. But Jordan, thanks very much for your time on a whistle stop tour of what might be a very uneventful free agency period.
Thank you for having me on again. Always a great time.
Appreciate it, man.